All right, Flyin Miata fans, welcome to Laguna Seca. We're here for the Miata Reunion. There have been thousands of people here, probably 1,000 cars. It's been completely nuts all day long. And this is our booth. We have two of the pit garages here that we are using to show off a whole bunch of our stuff. We're using to show off a whole bunch of our cars. Zombie Elvis is here. Elvis was on the track yesterday in full-on track mode, and today we put him in hill climb mode just to show things off because it's fun. Tomorrow we'll be back in track mode giving rides. Elvis is a car that we bought back in 2003, Mazda gave to us to do the Super 4 Challenge. It was one of our development cars for big turbos, for natural gas bitted power. It was our first V8 car, and it was retired a couple of years ago. So we could work on the NDs, and we needed some parts. And our friend Brian and one of our employees, Matt, bought the car from us. They put another V8 back in it, and it is now a hill climb car that runs in the Colorado Hill Climb Association runs. And it's a complete lunatic of a vehicle. And we decided to call it Zombie Elvis because Elvis came back from the dead and looks a little worse for wear, but has transformed himself. So Zombie Elvis has been a popular car. I don't think a lot of people understand it. They look at this thing, they see it jacked up on these crazy tires, and they're just a lot of head scratching going on, but that's okay, it's part of the fun. The engine is an LS3 with the ASA cam. It's the crate engine from GM Performance, the LS376 525, rated at 525 horsepower. The T56 behind it has got faced gears on it, so it's essentially, almost a dog box. It's got a sequential shifter, which is pretty cool. So they can just bang through the gears on this thing as they are scrabbling for traction on the dirt and trying not to drive off the side of a mountain. So if you think you can multitask, maybe gravel hill climbing is for you, especially in a rear-wheel drive car with way too much horsepower.
Yeah. What does it take to drop one of these into this chassis?
Dropping this engine in is not too bad. It's a fairly well-solved problem. We've been doing them for 10 years, 11 years. This car, of course, was already converted when Matt and Brian got it, but it's a fairly easy thing to do. You get the subframe from V8 Roadsters, you get the powertrain kit basically from V8 Roadsters. We have a bunch of finishing parts, such as this radiator is built specifically for V8 Miatas in an NA or NB chassis. The headers are built specifically for this application. So we have a bunch of parts that'll sort of help you almost bolt it together. They're all the parts that we use when we build them in our shop. This car, of course, has got some extra stuff on it. It's got fire suppression and everything that's required by the Hill Climb Association. Even transmission coolers with a pump here in the engine bay. So this is definitely an extreme example of the breed. It runs our Fox suspension when it's on the track, and when it's running off-road, it actually runs our old AFCO suspension, which was originally developed for the Targa Newfoundland. So it's really, really good on rough and loose surfaces, and has the compliance they need to make that work. Plus we've got a lot of experience with it on really, really rough surfaces. So they're still sorting it out. It's the first year of competition, but it's a crazy, crazy fun vehicle to poke around and just discover little things. Plus the best part about it is the Hello Kitty seat cushion. Because, you know, every serious race car should have Hello Kitty seat cushions.
JDM car, JDM seat. I like that. There's a sequential shifter and the that Willwood e-brake.
Yeah, it's got a hydraulic handbrake to, you know, help rotate, because of course the hard part with this car is getting it to turn. Yeah, not so much. And they can just bang shifts through this thing on the sequential shifter. It's a really cool piece of mechanical equipment in there that basically converts.
And this is on a T56?
That's a T56. It converts an H pattern to a sequential pattern.
Huh.
It's a little cranky on the street, but yeah, you can just bang through shifts like you'd not believe. And next to this monster, we have possibly the cleanest Miata in existence, the OMGMIATA. We wish that every single one of our turbo installs looked this good, I've got to tell you. The attention to detail is just beautiful, but this is our stage 1 California legal, 50 state legal emissions turbo system. And a car like this, it's rated right about 180 horsepower at the wheels, which is about 80 more than the factory. And it's a nice lift and power, brings it up into sort of a modern power to weight ratio without making the car a big laggy monster. So it's a really fun street car. My own street car is very similar to this. And not everyone managed to do quite as clean an install as this, but this is what we should all aim for.
How long does it usually take to install this?
So installation time depends. It depends on the person who's doing the install. You know, as you can see on this car, everything's polished. This would have taken a little longer than usual. The polish on the did some nice finishing work on the heat shield on there. The heat shield on that's been polished. The ceramic coated the turbo manifold. But for most people, I think we used to book about 15 hours to do this job. I have done them in a weekend. You know, we come in, drive a car into the home garage on a Friday afternoon and be test driving on Sunday. If you're reasonable with the rent, that's attainable. I'd say a couple of weekends is probably legitimate for most people that they're doing.
Okay. And it obviously comes with instructions like all your other products.
Comes with a book of instructions like you would not believe, yeah. And of course we're always available, not so much on weekends, but during the week we're available for tech support, email, phone, web, whatever you want to do. So we're definitely there. You may not have done a turbo install before, but we've done turbo installs and we have a bunch of techs who are online waiting to help out with that. So the stance, obviously, it's kind of hard to miss those fender flares, kind of hard to miss those wheels. But the whole car is all about little tiny details and not just big showy stuff. Stuff like the polish, there's no fluting in the turn indicators because that makes it look so much cleaner, and that's been polished off by the looks of it. The paint on this thing is just, to die for. And everything, even the Moroso overflow has been polished, you know, just those extra little touches that take it a step above. So we're very happy to have this in the booth today. It's been getting a lot of attention, as you can imagine. So that is OMGMIATA, Instagram, Facebook, all your favorite social media. You can check out the build of this thing. And of course, beside that, we have our very famous Indy, most recently on Proving Grounds on NBC Sports, Car and Driver, Automobile, Road and Track, Top Gear Magazine, Motor Magazine, Smoking Tire, okay, you name it, this car has been there. Car journalists know this car, and they come up with the flimsiest excuses to get their chance to drive this thing. They'll contact us and say, hey, we want to do a 30th anniversary story on the Mazda Miata, so we want to drive the V8 car to talk about that. It's hilarious. But it is a really, really fun car. This is the R&D car for this platform. We're the only people who have the parts and, more importantly, the electronics to put this engine in this chassis. And we do sell them, so you can build one yourself. It's as close to a bolt-in as you can get with something like this. There's very little metal work needs to be done.
Yeah. What kind of work do you need to do to fit this?
What kind of work do you need to do? Honestly, the actual moving stuff around is very little. There's one little cross brace has to be drilled, spot weld to take it out. And the bell housing needs just a little more room in the tunnel, and you can basically do that almost just by hammering it open a little bit. So it's surprisingly little, and everything else is just a bolt-in. Of all the generations, this is actually the easiest one to do the mechanical work on in the swap. We use stock subframes front and rear, but we modify them. So you send us the subframes, we'll modify them, we'll send them back to you. Or we can just send you some new subframes that we've modified, but we use the factory engineering for that.
It looks tighter than the NA and NB, doesn't it?
It's not really any tighter than the earlier cars. In fact, it's a wider engine bay than we have in the other cars. So the engine fits in there with a little more room to spare. We're able to put in bigger headers on this generation than we could on the earlier generations as well. So physically, actually, the fit is not as bad as you'd think, even though it is a small car. Where it's really different is the complexity of electronics, trying to get everything to talk to everything else. The fuel gauge in this thing doesn't work like a normal fuel gauge. It actually it works more in dead reckoning, where it receives a little tick from the ECU that says, I just used X cc's of fuel, X cc's of fuel, ting, ting, and the faster those little flicks come, the more fuel it figures it's running, or it's using, and the faster it brings down the fuel gauge. And of course, we had to find that signal in the Mazda system. We had to identify what the units were, how often it was sent, and then we had to take the GM signal and fold, spindle, and mutilate it, and send it down into the Mazda system so the fuel gauge, and that was just to get the fuel gauge to work. You don't want to know how many times I ran out of gas on the side of the road before we figured out the fuel gauge. This car never left the shop with less than 3/4 of a tank because you never knew. And there's little problems like that all over the place.
When did you guys start making this kit?
We started development on this car in January 2016. January 2016. We got the car in August 2015. We yanked the engine out in January, and we were driving it on track at our summer camp event in August. So it took about 9 months to get the engine in. Yeah, it was about 9 months to get the engine in and running. And then it took us probably another year, year and a half to get the electronics figured out, to get the fuel gauge working, to get things like the tire pressure monitoring system going. We're still working on traction control to see if we can get the stability control working. It's not the end of the world if we don't. It'd be kind of nice to have it. But that is sort of the level we're working on in this thing right now. And of course, we spend a lot of time on the chassis as well. It's running our Fox Racing suspension. It's got 7 inches of shock travel in the rear, or wheel travel actually, 7 inches of wheel travel in the rear. It's got massive brakes front and rear. It'll do 0 to 150 in under 19 seconds. 0 to 60, 3.5, but really, who counts? And it stops quickly. It'll pull over a G on the skid pad. It's a good all-rounder. I've done 12-hour days in this thing on the interstate, and it's still, just a great car for road tripping, as well as being a complete maniac around the track.
Wow. And this is an LS3?
This is an LS3. This is the same engine. This is the LS3 525, so it's that ASA cam again. We chose the ASA cam on this one because it's a little nuts. The car shakes at idle, just kind of like rocks a little bit, which is always fun. And it's got this wickedly sharp throttle response in the mid-range. It just got this animal edge to it. The 430, the standard engine, is a little more refined. It's got a smoother idle. It's a production car engine, so it's super smooth all the time. This one's got some edges to it, but it's got that crazy that you're really kind of looking for. And so we had some discussions. I like the crazy. My track car has the crazy. Zombie Elvis has the crazy. And so Indy has the crazy.
What's the miles per gallon on this thing?
Actually, on the highway, it did about the same as a turbo Miata. We were in the, I think the high 20s.
Wow.
When we were driving this thing down to California a few months ago. Around town, it's a little more tragic. These things run on like a gallon per hour basis. So you are going to consume so many gallons in an hour, and if you are going slowly during that hour, you will use a lot of gallons. So yeah, it'll do stop and go traffic. It's just atrocious. But that's the case with all else engines. But get out on the highway, yeah, and it's happy as a clam. It's cruising at 1,800 RPM and in the high 20s, low 30s for fuel economy.
Cool. What's the weight difference between the stock engine and this swap?
Weight differential on this thing, it picks up about 250 pounds over the stock setup. The weight balance is about 1% further on the front. I think it's 53% on the front instead of 52. It's actually the same weight balance. It's better weight balance than you get with the Fiat 124 Spider, which shares this same platform, but has a little iron block turbo 1.4 or something like that in it. So the weight balance is actually still quite good. With an RF, it'd be awfully close to 50-50 with that extra weight of the roof on the back.